The original Unsolved Mysteries series covered more than 1,300 cases, and the recent Netflix reboot has added to that total. Of course, around 30% have since been solved, many using tips submitted by users. The first season of the rebooted show drew in more than 200 credible tips, so it's likely more Unsolved Mysteries cases will come in the future. These are 5 cases covered on Unsolved Mysteries that have since received answers. Number 5. The Chevy Chase Bandit was caught directly due to a tip from an Unsolved Mysteries viewer. The Bandit started his bank robbery on November 3, 1987, by tripping over the rug that lay in the bank doorway, his fall reminding witnesses of how Chevy Chase tripped and fell on Saturday Night Live. Unlike the comedy skit, no one was left laughing for long. The robber calmly picked himself up and walked to the bank teller before giving her a note. The note told the teller he had a gun and a bomb, and he wanted big bills. According to the note, he had a partner waiting outside. As the teller read the note, he repeated that he had a gun and threatened to use it if she didn't reply. The teller complied, and the robber fled with around $700. Luckily, his image was caught on CCTV, but almost a year after the robbery, police had come no closer to bringing him to justice. In August of 1988, he was listed as one of the Los Angeles Police Department's most wanted bank robbers, along with the image and description, but when the case aired on Unsolved Mysteries that November, there were no leads. With a renewed focus on the case, police finally got the tip they needed. A member of an LA therapy group contacted the FBI to identify the Chevy Chase Bandit as Bernard Strick. Strick had previously been a lawyer, but was disbarred shortly before the robbery after being convicted of manslaughter in a drug-related incident in 1980. In the hearing for his disbarment, the court said he made commendable efforts at rehabilitation, but his crime violated the sentiment of his role as a lawyer. Strick pleaded guilty to the robbery and served 4 years in prison. Number 4. In February of 1995, a bizarre mystery began when a woman woke up in Audubon Park in New Orleans with no memory and, among other things, 4 pairs of scissors. She believed her name was Gigi, though she didn't know why. She had no personal identification on her, though she was found with UPS notices for company employees and deposit envelopers from the northeastern US. Gigi was taken to a hospital where she stayed for 6 weeks before being moved to a psychiatric clinic. The cause for her amnesia could not be identified. She had no serious injuries that would explain the issue. Gigi was given sodium amytal, a so-called truth serum, but it led to no answers. Foul play was a possibility. The fact that she had no personal ID at all gave rise to the possibility someone had purposefully tried to hide Gigi's true identity, though investigators could only guess at why. When searches through missing persons records provided no answers, Gigi's case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries in August of that year. Almost immediately, the case was solved. One of Gigi's co-workers had been watching the show and recognized her as 31-year-old medical secretary Belinda Lynn from Wilmington, Delaware. The tip was confirmed by matching dental records. Unfortunately, this wasn't the end of Gigi's ordeal. Her parents had known she was missing since February, but hadn't bothered to report her. She had apparently been diagnosed with schizophrenia in her teens, but stopped taking her medication years ago. Phone calls with her parents left her depressed and angry, and her father told reporters he didn't know if he wanted to bring her home with her emotional problems. Gigi told carers at the clinic not to call her Belinda, and that she wanted to remain known as Gigi. There are still a number of questions surrounding Gigi's case. Whether she really was suffering from amnesia or was faking the illness has come into question after her schizophrenia diagnosis was revealed. According to her parents, Gigi had done something similar to this in the past, and many believe the amnesia was faked, although there doesn't appear to be any evidence either way. If Gigi really did lose her memories, the reason why and how she ended up in New Orleans with the random assortment of objects she had remains unknown. Number 3. Margie disappeared from her home in Gary, Indiana in September of 1997. It was believed she was with her boyfriend, a wanted criminal, who was indicted for a crime spree that included many violent crimes, though her family didn't know if she'd gone willingly. It had been a difficult 2 years for Margie. She started 1996 a newlywed and successful violinist in the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, but her life changed when her husband of 6 months died in a car crash. Margie was deeply upset by the death and quit her job to move back in with her mother in Indiana. She worked as a night manager at her mother's bar, where she met Randy Mad Yeager. Yeager was a senior member of a motorcycle gang called the Outlaws. He had a long criminal record and had served time in prison. At the moment the two met, the gang was being investigated by the federal police for racketeering, drug dealing, and murder. It wasn't known how much of Yeager's history Margie knew about, but the two began dating. Margie grew distant from her family, who were growing more and more concerned about her. In June of 1997, about 3 months into their relationship, they took a trip to Las Vegas. However, this wasn't an ordinary vacation, as police were closing in on Yeager and other members of the Outlaws. Police tracked Yeager and Margie down to Las Vegas, but by the time they arrived, the couple had disappeared. Yeager wasn't caught, but 2 weeks later, Margie returned home. She was shaken and obviously now knew about her boyfriend's history. It's not clear what happened during the 2 weeks she was away, but Margie was certain she was being followed and her apartment was bugged. 3 months later, Margie vanished from her apartment. She left behind all of her belongings, including her car, luggage, and medication for asthma. Yeager was the prime suspect, but it still wasn't clear whether Margie had gone willingly with him or not. Given her reaction after the Las Vegas trip, it seemed as if the two hadn't parted ways on the best of terms, and there was no indication she'd been planning on running away. In 2014, 13 years after the segment aired, police were finally able to track down Yeager and Margie. They'd been living together in Rosarito, Mexico. Authorities arrested Yeager, but Margie fled in a vehicle. Not knowing who she was, police chased after Margie, who died in the high-speed chase. Number 2. The unsolved death of Nancy Dadisman first appeared on Unsolved Mysteries in 2001. At the time, there were no suspects and no leads police were investigating, and it wasn't until 8 years later that Nancy's attacker was identified. 42-year-old Nancy disappeared in September of 1998. She'd recently gone through a bitter divorce and lost custody of her 5 children. She lived in Bowling Green, Kentucky, but on September 4th, she decided to travel to Indianapolis to meet her boyfriend, a man named Jack Woodbine. Unfortunately, Nancy didn't make it out of Bowling Green before her car broke down, but she didn't give up on the trip either. She met up with friends at a Waffle House and told them she was getting a ride. The last any of them heard from her was a phone call in which she told a friend she'd managed to get a ride. When Nancy didn't arrive in Indiana, she was reported missing. It wasn't until 2 years later that her remains were found. On September 21st, 2000, 2 boys were cave diving when they came across skeletal remains in a rocky wooded area near Park City. Investigators used clothing found near the remains and dental records to identify the remains as belonging to Nancy. She died due to stab wounds, and it seemed she had been where she was found since her disappearance. Investigators theorized the person responsible had to be someone who knew the area well, as there were many more accessible hiding spots in the area that the culprit had chosen not to use. By the time the case appeared on Unsolved Mysteries, both Nancy's boyfriend and her ex-husband had already been ruled out by investigators, and police were now at a dead end. Unlike other cases on the list, the mystery wasn't solved by viewers but by a confession. In 2009, David Bell confessed to killing Nancy and several other women. He was already in prison for a separate charge, and at first, police weren't sure if they should believe the confession, but it lined up with the physical evidence. According to Bell, he was high on drugs when he picked up Nancy, who had decided to hitchhike to Indiana. Due to his intoxicated state, he wasn't sure of the details, but he did remember knocking her out with a metal pole. He attacked her with a knife when she woke up and tried to fight him off. Defensive wounds on Nancy's arms matched this story. Bell is yet to be tried in Nancy's case, but he's currently serving a 65-year jail sentence. Number 1. In 1992, Unsolved Mysteries managed to reunite a family after a man in his 60s disappeared without a trace 5 years earlier. Alex Cooper, who had been married to his wife, Margaret, for 35 years, when he turned 65 in 1987, they had 5 children and several grandchildren. There were no known strains on their marriage, and Alex's work as a salesman meant they didn't have money troubles. It was shortly after Alex would have been eligible for his pension that the 65-year-old disappeared from his home. His daughter and son-in-law found his car near a river, and figuring he had stopped for a spot of fishing, searched the area for him. When they couldn't find him, they contacted Margaret, who revealed she hadn't seen him in almost a day. The police were contacted and a land and air search began. Margaret feared he'd been robbed and killed, while his daughter believed he may have had a heart attack and fallen into the river. There were no signs of any footprints around his car, and his fishing equipment was still inside. Local news broadcast stories about the disappearance, and before long, witnesses contacted police claiming they had seen someone matching Alex's appearance hitchhiking in the area. But as time wore on and no further leads came forward, the case went cold and Alex was declared legally dead. The case itself wouldn't have been too strange, but Margaret later went to acquire Alex's birth certificate, only to discover one didn't exist. She found there was no evidence of Alex Cooper having existed before he married Margaret. According to official documents, the man she had been married to for 35 years didn't exist. Things only got stranger when, in 1991, a man matching Alex's description was reported missing in Toronto. The man called himself David Cooper and was a traveling salesman who'd spent the past year living in a boarding house. For some reason, while he was on one of his business trips, a friend reported him missing. A photograph of David holding his grandchild found in his room confirmed to authorities David and Alex were the same person, and it appeared he had disappeared once again. This time, however, Alex came back. He immediately noticed fingerprint dust and other evidence of police activity in his room, and his landlord informed him he'd been reported missing. Instead of clearing anything up, Alex fled again, and hadn't been seen for 4 months when the Unsolved Mysteries segment about his disappearance aired in September of 1991. Now, with an international spotlight shown on his case, Alex couldn't hide. A viewer in Canada got in touch to reveal Alex's new location in the town of Hamilton. Before he could flee again, authorities caught up with him, and he explained that his real name was Albin Arsene Arsenal. When Albin had been 26 years old, he'd been falsely accused of robbing a post office he worked at and had gone on the run. He'd lived a good life as Alex Cooper, only for everything to fall apart when he needed a birth certificate to claim his pension. Not realizing the charges against him had long since been dropped, and not wanting to reveal the truth to his family, he faked his disappearance. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.